All right. So, welcome everybody to a new podcast slash YouTube channel. And a lot of you have been listening to me as Addiction and Redemption. And I've decided to shift the focus of Addiction and Redemption to a new show called Telling Tales. Now, if I did the technical aspect right, whoever's subscribed to Addiction and Redemption will just it'll just change the name of it. In what automatically downloads to your phone. But then I'm adding a YouTube channel as well. So, and the purpose of Telling Tales is to, if it's Telling Tales, it's not, I don't want to be pigeonholed into addiction. I don't want to be the addiction guy. I happen to have all these tales that I told, but there are a lot more tales to tell that aren't just related to drug use and drug abuse and all that crazy ass shit that I talked about in the podcast. Some people think that my coaching has something to do with addiction also, and it doesn't have anything to do with addiction. I don't coach addicts. All the help that's available for addicts is free, and it's readily available through various programs that don't cost a cent. So I don't want to say I want to distance myself from that, but I'm just looking to sort of evolve, and this is just where it's evolving into something new, and the thing that it's evolved into is Telling Tales. So I've got my first guest here on the show to tell her tale, and her name is Jennifer Lovely. And so we've got the lovely, as I'm getting less nervous, it's just starting to flow a lot easier. So we've got the lovely Jennifer Lovely on the show today as the first guest for Telling Tales, who's got some harrowing tales to tell herself. So Jennifer Lovely is a colleague of mine, a fellow coach. She is a mom of two boys. They are 21 and 23 years old. She lives in, pronounce it Whitby?
Whidbey.
Whidbey. This reminds me of a street in Fort Collins called Whidbey. Whidbey Island, which is where again? Off the coast of Washington or Oregon? Seattle, okay. Yeah. Out floating out there in the northerner Pacific that I'm a frequenter of. She moved there from Orange County. She is on her own hero's journey. She owns a yoga studio, and that studio is called Studio Whidbey. And it's a pleasure to have her here today. So now that my ramble is over, how are you? Welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks for sitting tight while I introduce the new thing, while I ad-lib the new introduction, whatever.
Yeah, no problem. I'm excited to be a part of your Telling Tales, especially since I've listened to every single one of your Addiction and Redemption podcasts.
What did you gather from that, by the way, in regards to Telling Tales?
That you have a lot of tales to tell.
And what did you gather regarding tales in general?
That everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
And everybody's story is important.
Yeah.
And there's always something in it for ourselves.
Cool. So you mentioned, as we were getting acquainted before we officially started recording, that you're on your own hero's journey, which I just read. But why don't you share a little bit about that? What the hero's journey is, and how that relates to you, and what you've been through and where you're going. So in other words, tell your tale.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my hero's journey started about 3-4 years ago. As my kids, excuse me, I've got a cold, dove into their own addiction of heroin and meth, I was forced to have to really look at myself. And in that, I was forced to just see that there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Uncovered, and I needed to uncover that. So as I began the steps towards healing myself, I decided that Orange County was not the place that I wanted to continue that journey. And so I really abruptly left everything in Orange County and moved up to, I had a house up there on the island, so I moved up to the house and sat for like 6 months, sort of twiddling my thumbs, dabbling in some woo-woo, and realizing that I no longer wanted to be married to the man that I was married to. And I needed to give my children the room to allow their journey to happen, whatever that was. And it's been a journey.
Yeah. What did giving them room look like?
Getting out of their way.
Getting out of their way so that they could what?
So that they could fail. It was like I was giving them the gift of failure. I didn't have to save them anymore. So they ended up in jail, 14 rehabs. Yeah.
Yeah. And what goes on in the inner world of a mom when her kids end up in jail?
Panic. What did I do to make them go to jail? What are they numbing? What hurts so bad that they need to do this?
What's the emotion?
Still hurts.
Yeah. And so what exists, like what's on the other side of that that pain and the things that came up?
Well, I'd say freedom. No more shame.
Yeah. So what's the relationship between their healing journey and yours?
Well, I was 18 when I got together with their father and had my first son by the time I was 20 and or 19 rather. And I think for me, this isn't for everybody, but for me, it was really like we were growing up together. And from that place.
You mean you and your ex-husband?
No, me and the boys were kind of growing up together. My ex-husband was 32 when I got together with him. So we were growing together, and I think the realization that there's some emotional stuntedness that happens. And so the other side of that, or the parallel world, is that they were also emotionally stunted as they were doing the drugs. They stopped growing when they started doing drugs. So because I never dealt with my pain, it was still there. They weren't dealing with their pain. They were using drugs.
Right. So this is a bit of a leap, but is it safe to say that because that sort of people in general who don't deal with their pain birth people who won't deal with theirs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right. And so, yeah, so we call that, like the one of the 12-step programs I work, one of the few 12-step programs I work, right, is that there's there's a cycle of dysfunction. That dysfunction is generational. And
yes.
very often a person inside of a family line will very often find themselves waking up, right, to their own hero's journey, to an opportunity that they have to heal, to put an end to this.
Yeah.
To put an end to the cycle. So your healing process, right, involved looking at what?
My childhood. Things I didn't get, and the trauma. I'm just so much trauma. I remember going to my therapist. I've had many therapists, by the way. And this last one that I went to, I remember her saying to me, you're not going to have to continue doing this. We're going to, for lack of a better word, fix this. And I said, well, I think I have PTSD. And she's like, no, honey, you have complex PTSD. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh, and it was a time, it was like, oh, I get to be special because I have complex PTSD. Mm-hmm. Most people just have PTSD.
Right. So share, if you will, if you would be generous with whoever's watching or listening, about the complexity of your trauma.
Yeah. So I grew up, well, my mom left when I was 5. and she kept my sister. My sister is 4 years older than I was. And she really, it was funny. I remember the day she came home and told me that I was going to live with my dad. It was like, oh, I'm okay. So I went and I packed my little bag and I was like, I'm ready. Let's go. And that still is very much who I am today. Like, I step over things.
Right.
Let's just move forward. So I lived with my dad, my stepmom, and my stepbrother. And then my dad and my stepmom had a daughter together, a younger sister. And it was traumatic. My dad was incredibly angry. He had been involved in the mafia when I was in my early life. And he had
legit mafia.
Yeah. He was he was short, and I think he needed like a lot of props.
Right.
And my dad was like a lot of fun, but he was a crazy alcoholic. And so I moved in there, and it was just very traumatic. It was my stepmom had a lot of moods. I never knew what, like, the wind blew south, what was going to be what was it going to be like today? Right. So from that, we moved around quite a bit, but we landed in a home in Costa Mesa. And when I was 7, my stepbrother came into my room and raped me. And that did not stop until I was 14. And the odd thing is, and it's not really odd, but my dad always overly sexualized me when I was young. Always shared his sexual tales, always shared his deep personal feelings with only me. And it seemed like my brother doing that and my dad doing that was it was like the way it was supposed to be. Yeah.
What made it meant to be?
Because in some weird way, it was like I was special.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is thanks so much for sharing this. I think this is such a relevant topic. I think it's something people really have curiosities to know more about, and that and that they don't know where to begin finding these types of things out, right? But what happens in the mind of a first of all, there's abandoned by mother. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this abandonment, and then there's violation, right? Like very serious violation, and so we're left with this very complex web of emotional / physical / like sexual trauma.
Right.
Right. And if you can articulate it, like what goes on, and as children, we don't have the capacity or the ability to intellectualize, to make sense of this in any sort of intellectual way. And children then internalize, right? So they then make the world mean certain things. But can you articulate or attempt to articulate what goes on in the mind of a child, or the being even of a child, that this sort of thing is happening to?
I know that I got really small, and at the same time, I became a really big extrovert. I played soccer. I had lots of friends. I kept myself very, very busy to avoid all of this. I got small inside my house. So in order to survive, I just kind of kept my mouth shut and didn't say a whole lot. And
this is as your brother is doing this to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The interesting thing, and people talk about this and people know about it, is that the act, especially when you're young, I mean, the act actually begins to feel good.
Right.
Right. But then you're confused because you know that it's wrong.
Right.
So I remember my sister coming to visit when she would come to visit, and one of the things we didn't do is say trigger warning on this, but and this could be triggering, but one of the things that happened is that sexuality would act out come out in other ways.
Right.
And so there was just this, and that was the only way I could control anything.
Was by acting out sexually?
Yeah.
Right.
So it could be like masturbation. It could be any of those things. It was just like, I'm just going to do this, and this is going to help me control. So it was, I feel like a lot of, what I didn't know is and this is what codependency is I was controlling a lot of different things in my life in order to not have to deal with that. But what happened when my brother was doing that is that I disassociated. I went somewhere else.
Where'd you go?
I don't know. I pretended that I was like flying and that nobody could get me.
Wow. Interesting. And at the same, so I think, I interviewed a guy for my my last podcast, and he was talking about we were getting down to like what were like some of the fundamental, like he's a really successful guy. And we were getting down to some of the fundamental challenges that he was facing with life. And he said that one of the biggest obstacles he had to overcome was his relationships with women, right? He got into wacky relationships with women. And he didn't realize that he had actually been sexually assaulted by his babysitter when he was like 11. He's like 11 years old, and it felt, he said, this is really different and new and fun and feels good.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, one of the taboo aspects, this you're still dealing with like sexual experiences.
Right.
And with being a child, you don't know the difference between right and wrong, except there's this peculiar type of intuition that's telling you it's wrong, while at the same time it's making you feel good.
Right.
Right. Which then warps your perception and then warps the path that you take relationally.
Correct.
Right. So what then became, I guess, of your sexuality?
Well, it wasn't mine. So everything I did was to please somebody else. Like, I don't know that I ever experienced an orgasm until much, much later in life, because everything was really about the other person. So I knew if I could act this way and this, sexually, that people or men would like me, because sort of became this seduction strategy. Right. Of my life.
Right.
And it was just all about the man. It wasn't about me. I never had my own sexuality. So really understanding what my feminine is or was non-existent.
Right. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. This is really fascinating. And I think it's a really relevant conversation that the world can benefit from. Like what is, if we were to just sort of coach, like we're both coaches, if we were to sort of like coachize this and look into the possibility that exists, like what exists for the world in normalizing this conversation? Because you're far from the only woman or man that this sort of thing has happened to.
Yeah. I think the thing that, for instance, the Me Too movement or when people talk about their sexual abuse or sexual assaults, it's I was sexually assaulted or I was sexually abused, and then boom, that's it. There's nothing more. And I think diving into how it happened, what did you create from that, or how did you act out?
Right.
Is the healing part. Like that for me has been the ridding myself of the shame of it.
Right. Right. So it's getting like you were victimized.
Right.
You're not coming from victim. And
right.
That's and nothing like this is not a political show or anything like that, but the place that the Me Too movement is coming from is from victim, and it oversteps. It occurs to come from victim, and I'm saying that in a judgmental way, right?
Right.
But it overstems. That's coachy jargon, right? but it oversteps the multiple nuances that lead to the choices that people make, that lead to outcomes that are predictable, but at the same time you can't predict, if that makes sense.
Right. Because everybody acts out differently. There's all sorts of things that it's like, it's in therapy, they'll say, well, it's very normal that a girl who was molested goes out and becomes promiscuous. And that's not always true.
Right.
I mean, right. It's not always true. And yes, that was the case for me. And when I was younger, I acted out in other ways as well. So,
right.
And from that, I can go, I was victimized, and I'm also responsible for those actions because there was consequences for all of it.
Right.
And,
right. And so this, well, what's
I own it.
Yeah. And so what does owning it all make possible?
Going on your hero's journey.
Yeah.
Finding out who you really are.
Right.
What you really, really want.
Right.
And because the thing about the hero's journey is like, in a story like mine, there's not really a hero. But in going on your own journey, you get to be your hero. Right. And that feels like better than having somebody else be your hero.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's why I like, I always like to presence in the first episode of my podcast, Awakening to Your Hero's Journey, Addiction and Redemption, Awakening to Your Hero's Journey was the name of the talk. Right. Mm-hmm. And I talk about, Luke Skywalker, he's just this guy. He's just this kid. I think he had some kind of Jedi training, but I can't recall exactly. But one day he goes away, he wanders away from his village. He just goes to do some errands basically. And he ends up purchasing R2-D2. This is how it goes down. He purchases R2-D2 and C-3PO, I believe, to just do some errands and some chores around town. That's where R2-D2 and C-3PO come into the picture. And he returns back to the village, right, and turns on R2-D2, and R2-D2 has this projection of Princess Leia who's saying, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi," right? Mm-hmm. So then Luke goes and meets Obi-Wan Kenobi against his uncle's advice. His uncle basically forbids him, right? And Obi-Wan introduces Luke to the Force, right? The concept of the Force. And then when Luke goes back to the village, after seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi, his village has been burned by the dark side and destroyed. And at that point, his aunt and uncle are dead. So his life is gone from one experience of what it means to be alive. I'm just this normal farm boy. Same thing happens in The Wizard of Oz.
Right.
The tornado comes through when she wakes up in Oz, right? And now he has to take this journey and discover the thing that he's been sent here to discover, which unlocks the Force, right? Which then he blows up his Death Star, which is, in my opinion, the Death Star is just the ego. It's the fear-based self that then allows the Force and or God, the universe, to work through him.
Yeah.
Right. And so it sounds to me like your wake-up call was it's like a combination. It's almost like your sons are all of a sudden, it's like, I've been a good mom. I've done all I could. Right. And then your sons are all of a sudden having these drug problems, and you have to go to your island to wake up.
Yeah.
You go to your island to sort of start accessing your Jedi powers.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about the abuse is that it gave me Jedi powers.
Tell me more.
It really did. It gave me a sense of knowing people in a different way than had that not experience happened, I would not know. I read people really, really well. I understand people really, really well. And in some ways, I'm not saying I'm clairvoyant or can read people's mind, but I know things about people that they desperately try to hide.
Right.
And because of that experience.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
Okay. I was really able to hone in on my deep, deep intuition about things.
Right.
And even though I stuffed that down, when I moved to the island and when I became more awake, if you will, I was really able to really have a different access point to those Jedi powers.
And we have a little technical difficulty because
Yeah, I see that.
yeah, that phone call came in, and so I'm frozen. But can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so everybody can still hear everything. So we're just gonna go with it and
Yeah.
not be perfectionistic. So if you're watching, sorry, you just get to look at a still frame of me. Um, anyway, oh shoot. Well, we're just gonna have to go with it. Lesson learned. So what would have happened if you hadn't woke up?
I would still be married. I would still be I would still be a victim. I'd be walking around the world saying I am such a good person. How come nobody sees it?
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, and that's what happens. People
Mm-hmm.
like what's the juice in staying victimized?
Well, I mean, you get to point your fingers at someone else all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And
You never get to fully be, and this may sound a little coachy, but you never get to fully express your greatness.
right. Yep. And so you can argue even you don't get to run the full gamut that the human experience has to offer if
Right.
you're not that victim.
Right.
Right. And so then what's the relationship between, this is kind of a little bit of an offshoot, but what's the relationship between what you experienced and what your children ended up going through?
Well, they were victimized.
Right.
And they were victimized by my victimization. Right. And my story, you know, trauma seeps into it's a family pattern, so it just continues to seep in. And so from that, they were working through their trauma. They didn't know how to deal with it.
Right. And so life happened to them as the result of your dysfunctional past, and then their perceptions of reality became warped into what they did, and they embarked on the past that they did.
Yeah, correct.
Right? Unbeknownst to them. So life happened to them.
Yeah.
Right. And now, so the thing that they're sort of challenged with is making life happen.
Mm-hmm.
And how are they doing with that?
Good. My youngest one is he's got a year and 2 months sobriety, and my older one had a year 19 months, and he recently relapsed and went back to heroin.
Is it too much to ask what that experience was like for Mom?
No. I mean, it really, at the end, it just sucks. It just sucks, especially after everything. Like, I think one of the things that's been so frustrating is, like, I've put so much into their recovery, and I've put so much into my own recovery. And I just wonder, like, is it going to stop? Is it ever going to stop? And the thing is it's not. I mean, it's a journey. You keep going. You're going to have bumps. You're going to have stuff come up. And all of this is a part of the journey.
Yeah. And what does, what would you, anybody who's watching today, what would you hope that they gather from this or get from this?
You know, there's hope, and really taking a deep look at how you're victimizing yourself by not fully stepping into your hero's journey, and that it doesn't have to be your story doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to stop at where you were victimized, I guess.
Yeah.
You can keep going. I mean, you know, I always joke when I remember when I went to my coaching program, I was like, you know, I should have been a heroin addict, prostitute on the street, right, based on my life experiences. And I still am amazed that I've been able to overcome what I've been able to overcome. I mean, my courageousness and my ability to keep going is, like, it really is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really thank you for coming on and just being honest and open and real and vulnerable in service of whoever takes what they do from this, because well, I'm sorry, you want to say something?
Oh, I just was going to say, because the thing is like, we don't have to continue to suffer. We can actually transform our relationship to suffering.
Right.
And I really want people to understand that you can actually transform your suffering.
Right.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I, the reason that I took, the purpose of my, often pornographic style podcast with the addiction and just all the gnarly stories, like listen to this shit, right? The like pornographic side of it was really just, it's cathartic to share all that, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of that entire podcast, and the stories just were, like, I didn't embellish any of the stories. I didn't make up anything or exaggerate any of it. And the point of it, though, that I think got lost on certain people, certainly not everyone, was that the point of the story that I told about myself was just the backdrop for anything is freaking possible. Anything. Listen to this shit. Anything is possible. Right?
Yeah.
And that's really what I see in you. It's like life happened. This thing happened. A series of unfortunate events happened. And at some point, and the thing about you is I've never really heard victim. Right? It's kind of like, it's more like, these are the cards I've been dealt, and I'm going to play the cards I've been dealt in the predictable way for a while. Then I'm going to shift the way I'm playing those cards. It's kind of like you.
Right.
Your relationship isn't losing hand. It's like, this is what you do with a pair of deuces, right?
Right.
But there's been a reinvention in the way that you play is sort of how I hear the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, cool. So if we were to wrap up, like what are just some takeaways?
Just so I can be clear, takeaways from this?
For people who are listening.
Okay.
Like if you could just drop a couple of golden nuggets, what would they be?
Well, again, recreating our relationship with suffering, like it doesn't have to be suffering. Right. And the way we get out of suffering is to look deeper into ourselves. And I encourage, go get a coach, go get a therapist.
Go get you as a coach.
Yeah, come see me as a coach.
Yes.
But also, find out where you are on your hero's journey. I remember my coach told me, wink, wink, that I was a promiscuous Dorothy, and I just needed to click my heels to get home. Right. And I just remember that just like hitting home so much. And so find out who you are in Dorothy and what you need to do to click your heels to get home.
Right. Yeah, and the paradox of that whole the good witch says at the end of The Wizard of Oz, you've had the power all along.
Yeah.
But she had to take the journey in order to discover the power, and she had to fight the witch and the monkeys, and we've all got witches and monkeys who are out to get us. And it's like at the end of the day, you're just a freaking witch, and all I got to do is chuck some water on you, and you're done. Your fear is the thing that you're presenting yourself is not who you are. You're actually a coward, right? That's kind of what I gathered from the Wicked Witch of the West. Although if you read the book Wicked, she's got a whole side of the story too, which is fascinating.
Yeah. But the thing is that what and I'm not taking away that there aren't predators out there and all of that. Right, of course there are.
I hear you.
And what I want to say is that those witches and monkeys, those are actually inside of ourselves, and those are what we're fighting. Right. They're not outside. It's not outside of us.
Yeah. No, you're right. And actually in Return of the Jedi, I believe it is, or Empire Strikes Back, Luke chops the head off of Darth Vader in a sword fight, in a lightsaber fight, and the head rolls onto the ground and the mask comes off, and it's actually Luke.
Wow.
And that's like one of those very subtle nuances of that movie.
Yeah.
It's just an aspect of himself. And Darth Vader is his father.
Right.
So it's really just him. It's his own inner demons he's battling the entire time.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So we're gonna have to make an executive decision if we from Full Authenticity, whoever's watching, if we redo this or not, because of the seizing of the picture frame. But yeah, we'll process that one offline. And if they're listening to us, they can just hear how the process goes down.
Yeah, that's kind of cool too.
Totally. What would you like to be acknowledged for?
Authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for being one of the one of the most no bullshit real people I've ever met. My experience of you has been nothing shy of, this is a real human being with some real stuff. And you coming on here and being open and honest and vulnerable with whoever ends up listening to this is going to serve the world in enormous ways. So thank you for who you are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dad.
All right, guys, this is the end of episode 1 of Telling Tales. We've been here with the lovely Jennifer Lovely, who's been sharing all sorts of amazing, fascinating stuff. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a great day. Bye. Bye.